First, I'd like to thank Ede and the organisers of the first Commons Forum in Seoul for organising the event. I'm sorry I can't be there with you all. I'd also like to acknowledge Michelle Bowens, who suggested my involvement, and also Neil Gorenflow, Jose Ramos and Kirsten Larson, who are my colleagues in sharing, I guess you could say. I'd just also like to let you know that I have notes associated with this presentation, which can be made available afterwards. So, and also to thank the City of Seoul for its leadership in sharing cities. I've been paying attention back to 2012 when the legislation was passed. It's a very progressive thing to do. My day job is in state government in South Australia. My agency is transitioning from one focused on zero waste to one focused more on circular economy. So when cities like Seoul show leadership like this, it makes my job easier as well, as you can point to an example and say, look what this city is doing. So thank you for your progressive work on this over the last 6 or 7 years. So I wanted to talk today about an example of something I've been involved with here and the importance of the community-based circular economy. So one way of understanding the commons, and it's sometimes tricky to explain to people, is that it's not only the market economy or the government that can deliver what citizens need. Citizens themselves can do it. And in every city around the world, and Michelle Bowens talks about this often, you start mapping the commons initiatives, what citizens are doing in all sorts of areas, from food to transport, lending libraries. It's possible to create a map like this in just about every city around the world. You can put a pin which represents active citizens contributing to initiatives that build the commons. This was a map that was actually, or a process was funded by my agency to map community-based sharing in Adelaide. It's no longer functioning, but the idea remains valid and similar, and I see cities all around the world mapping their commons-based sharing and making it visible. We've always been sharing in cities, but I think the difference now is it's maybe a bit more visible. We can find what's going on around us more easily because of digital technology. And these citizens initiatives might be growing food. So this is Grow Free, which started in Adelaide, which was just making available surplus food through publicly accessible carts. And that's a map on the right there of how many Grow Free carts there are in my city now. There are initiatives like this and like tool libraries all around the world. These two happen to be from Australia. So this is the Brisbane Tool Library. They're sharing tools. They now have a space inside the State Library of Queensland, so they actually have a premises. So we often have redistribution commons or sharing commons, but what about a productive commons? So one of the key policy concerns for government now is the circular economy, how to make the best use of resources, how to keep them circulating in the economy for as long as possible. And another key concern is how to rapidly bring down carbon emissions to avoid further destabilising our Earth's climate. So we need to bend this line into the circle, but we need to complete the circle. We need to make sure that the recycling is coming back out into our procurement and our consumption elsewhere. We need to do all these things, stop wasting much, bring down carbon emissions, but unfortunately, all of our systems of ways of producing and delivering what people need is doing exactly the opposite. So at the time of the Rio events...
Sorry to interrupt, Sharon. Sorry to interrupt. There is a little technical problem. What you are saying, we did our best, but what you are saying is not loud enough in this room for everyone to understand. So they say that technical people advise that the only solution is for you to raise up the volume of your computer.
Okay, I've done that. Is that better?
Okay.
Can you hear better? I'll talk louder.
Will you try that?
Okay. Can you all hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, but 그걸 끄고. Okay, please say something.
Okay, can you hear me now?
이 들려요? 네? 별 차이가 없는 것 같은데? 이게 왜 스피커가 안 나와? 지금 가만 있어봐. 이게 뮤트가 돼 있는 것 같은데. Would you say something?
Yes, can you hear me now?
안 나오는데 안 나오죠. 뭔가 연결이 잘못됐구나.
세상에 조금만
Please hold. 이 컴퓨터에서 그러면 뭐가 좀 잘못돼 있을까요? 이 줌이라고 하는 프로그램에서 뭔가 좀 잘못되는 걸 수도 있잖아요. 예, 여기서 나오고 있어요. 그러니까 여기서 나오고 있긴 한데 여기로 안 들어가요. 그렇죠? 그래요?
아니 요거를 스카이프 몰라서
그래요? 아까는 이거 됐었는데. 이게요? 이 뮤트라고 하는 게 있는데. Could you say something, Sharon?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah,
better?
now it's solved.
Okay,
Yeah, we
Would
get
you-
beautiful voice.
lovely. Would you like me to start again? Because I'm only a couple of slides in. I can start again?
Okay.
Sure.
So yeah, go ahead then.
Okay, I'll begin again. So, just thank you to the City of Seoul for its leadership on the sharing economy. It's made my day job easier because I work in a state government agency that's increasingly turning its attention to circular economy. And thank you to Gibbon and all the organisers of the forum. And just acknowledging Michelle Bounds, who suggested my involvement, and my colleagues there, Neil Gorenflow, Jose Ramos, Kirsten Larson, and also all of the Koreans who presented today on the Commons initiatives in Seoul. So thank you very much. And I will have these notes available after for this presentation. So I just wanted to start off by saying sometimes it's tricky to talk to people about the Commons, but one way we can talk about it is that it's not only the market or the state that can deliver all the things citizens need. Citizens themselves can do it, so that's really the Commons. And in every city around the world, it is possible to create a map like this, where every pin represents active citizens contributing to initiatives that build and enhance the Commons. So all cities are mapping these kinds of initiatives. Every city everywhere could be doing it. This one happens to be from Adelaide. My agency funded this mapping platform. It's no longer live, but we mapped the bike sharing, food swaps, toy libraries, all those kinds of community assets. And the idea was to make it more visible. So we've always been sharing in our city, but digital technology allows us to make it more visible and to help people find out what's going on in their city and how to collaborate perhaps as well. So they might be growing food. This is Grow Free, which is a way of sharing surplus food, giving it away on publicly accessible carts. And the map on the right there is where the Grow Free carts are in Adelaide. It's also expanded across Australia and internationally. There are many initiatives like this in cities all around the world. Tool libraries is another one. These happen to be from Australia. So this is the Brisbane Tool Library. They have a space set up in the State Library in Queensland that was made available to them, so they now have a home. We've been really good at creating redistributive commons and sharing tools, sharing commons, but what about a productive commons? So one of the key concerns of government today is circular economy, how to bend this line, the linear economy, into the circle, how to make best use of resources and keep them circulating in the economy as long as possible. And another concern, of course, is to rapidly bring down carbon emissions to further avoid destabilising our Earth's climate. But if we want to bend the linear line into a circle, we have to complete that circle. We have to make that connection between what we're recycling and how we're manufacturing it back into new things. So we want to do these things where we waste less, use materials more efficiently, and take carbon emissions down. Yet all our ways of producing things and delivering to people what they need is doing exactly the opposite. So at the time of the Rio Earth Summit in 1992, estimates found that 75% of the natural resources harvested and mined from the earth are shipped, trucked, railroaded and flown to the 2.5% of the Earth's surface that is metropolitan cities, where 80% of those resources are converted into waste. So we are moving a lot of material around unnecessarily and wasting a lot of the material that does arrive for us as end users, consumers of supply chains that are out of sight, out of mind, and usually outside our ability to change or influence. Materials and carbon are intricately linked, with shipping by sea expected to be responsible for 17% of global emissions by 2050 if not addressed. Aviation is projected to be 22% of global emissions by 2050, meaning ships and planes will account for almost 40% of global emissions if left unchecked. This trend continues. So our current projections about carbon and climate may be an underestimate, as both shipping and aviation are excluded from international climate change negotiations because it's difficult to allocate the emissions to one country. Is it the producing or the consuming country who is responsible for the emissions? I think this may be starting to change, but it's only very recent. So if we are serious about re-engineering our linear take, make, waste economy into a circular economy, we need to be making locally and providing spaces where anyone can learn and maintain relevant skills to participate. A circular economy requires a local production capacity. Otherwise, it remains a bury, burn, or bale and export linear economy. If you're not making locally, you don't have a circular economy. So creating a circular economy does require an industrial scale response. This is advanced plastic recycling in Adelaide, which takes both industrial sources of plastic and also materials recycled from South Australian households which are collected at the curbside. The sheer volume of material means that we need industrial scale systems and infrastructure to handle it. And 9 Adelaide councils have just signed an agreement to buy back the materials collected from households in their area, by prioritising recycled content products and working towards a target of 50%. But this industrial scale response can be complemented by a community-based response and associated physical infrastructure. This includes initiatives like repair cafes, tool and equipment lending libraries. And sharing and repairing are key contributors to community-based circular economy. However, there is huge potential for relocalising production into cities with maker spaces and fabrication laboratories. Instead of overproducing in big, dirty factories that need to be separated from where people live, for health and safety reasons, manufacturing could return to the city as small-scale, clean, on-demand production. So a way of thinking about this, Michelle Bounds taught me this, is design global, manufacture local, or produce local. So the economy of bits, the light things, they travel. The data, the information, the design can move around. The heavy things, the economy of atoms, they stay local because you're having a huge carbon cost to move this stuff around. So if we have this enabling infrastructure, it can provide many benefits. From social connection and skills development, supporting the shift to a circular economy with repair, reuse, reducing consumption and avoiding consumption. So it's just the repair capability of fix-it clinics and repair cafes. If you're sharing resources you already have, you're reducing your resource consumption and avoiding consumption. I think this is an interesting one. Digital fabrication means you can be more precise in the use of materials, creating less waste that needs to be salvaged in the first place. And by designing to order, customisation and small batch production avoids wasteful overproduction that exists in manufacturing. So there are barriers to these community-based spaces in establishing and sustaining their operations, and I hope I've got my Korean correct from Google Translate here. Yes, but is usually what you face. So I've been involved in helping a makerspace, a community-based makerspace established in Adelaide, and these are the learnings that I've had through that process. So the barriers are rent, access to space and equipment. Often, citizens may not have the capital to access suitable space either through not being able to afford the purchase of the building or ability to afford commercial rent. In the US, Make Media produced a series on the business case of makerspaces, which investigated the issue. And Artisan Asylum, which is a big space outside Boston, said that rent was their largest ongoing expense, initially 75% of their income, and still at 25 to 30% of their income after years of being established. So this will vary from city to city, but the issue of rent is still a central question to whether such spaces can survive and thrive. This opens a broader question of who and what the city is for, and whether affordable spaces for use that cannot compete in a purely commercial sense have a role in the city. If so, there needs to be support which will include paying for space, as unless a suitable space can be donated or purchased, rent will be an ongoing and major cost. Expectations, though, will be self-sustaining. This is another thing that I ran into. Well, can this pay for itself? Can they generate their own revenue? Most of these spaces tend to be auspiced by universities or sponsored by government or corporations. But there may be this expectation they can pay for themselves and not be dependent on government or other large single sources of funding. And while it's in the interest of these spaces that any ongoing subsidy is sourced from a range of funders to insulate them from losing the impact of losing one major donor or sponsor, even for spaces which intend to move towards financial self-sufficiency, generated through enterprise as much as possible, this goal may not be achievable in the first years and may not be completely achieved. And then there's the regulatory requirements. So, do your planners understand what a makerspace is? Do the planning, zoning regulations help or hinder these spaces? So most planning authorities, these things are a little bit new and a bit weird. And because the activities that happen in them, like welding, there's things that are happening with fire or lots of water, they might not be allowed to establish in certain areas, and they might not fit under existing definitions such as community centres. So being able to clearly convey what these spaces are and what the noise, safety and traffic implications may be will assist in any approval process. So under some planning systems, a change in land use may constitute development and require approval. They don't have to undertake any major works. So how can governments adopt a partner-state approach in helping commons-based productive activity? Well, in relation to rent, often grants will actually prevent the use of funding for paying rent. Community grants tend to be too small to secure a space. Philanthropic funds may tend to favour fixing up the effects of our current economic and political systems and oriented towards tackling their symptoms such as homelessness, poverty and other forms of disadvantage. Industry development funds require organisations which have a 6 or 7 figure financial turnover. Very few of the funding opportunities fit these spaces, so I had to say, well, let's make one. So one way to make the case for these spaces is to talk about them as infrastructure, enabling infrastructure, because infrastructure budgets are often much bigger. So the concept of community technology workshops or makerspaces as social infrastructure, if infrastructure is defined as that enables an activity to occur, then space and the rent required to access it is infrastructure. So if a city or regional authority has budget for waste and recycling infrastructure, make an argument for transplanting some of that funding to the upper part of the materials hierarchy. In terms of revenue, makerspace differs from a social enterprise in that it serves many purposes, including as a community asset or a common asset, like a library which offers services to the community, and an incubator. ADX in Portland has incubated over 100 businesses. So where people with expertise provide training, mentorship and space for others to develop and build enterprises. Both common assets and incubators for other purposes are regularly supported with government funds. So if there is a need for an ongoing subsidy from a city or a shortfall rather than a fixed amount, they could be set up under a service level agreement where a for-benefit entity such as a community-based makerspace could provide a range of programs and services on behalf of the funding body. And there are many other options for funding civic infrastructure, including community land trusts, where community assets are held in a trust and stewarded by a non-profit entity on behalf of the community, or adapting this concept for an industrial land trust. And in terms of regulation, governments can help commoners to navigate the legal and regulatory requirements to become established, to keep operations safe, and to prevent any incidents which may jeopardise the ongoing availability of the space to the community. And here's my big question to finish up. One I don't have an answer to, though I know many researchers are investigating it, the values crisis, as Michelle calls it. I heard Jose mention it, and obviously Neil has mentioned it as well in one respect. So public value is often captured by private interests where development occurs. A rail line is built, water and other utilities are established, a park is created, and land is rezoned from farming to residential, and the land value of the surrounding property for private owners increases, gifting them a financial windfall. This land value uplift works to extract value from the common as private gain. Well, where is the reverse funding mechanism for commoners? These people are creating great value for the city and often working for nothing, and are being asked to pay rent and to be self-sustaining. So in Boston, a fund was set up in 1903 to capture a slice of the capital gain from properties bought and sold around a major city park. The value of those properties is influenced by proximity to the park. There is now $1 billion in that fund. Where are all the examples of similar mechanisms from around the world? And where do these funds go? Who do they benefit? Can we have a fund for commons initiatives as beneficiaries? If we can find a way to create a circular economy of value creation, to return some of it to those creating it, it would be an authentic circular economy, not just of materials, but one which supports people. But just to finish off, identifying and supporting community-based infrastructure projects that encourage local production and economic activity, extend the life of materials and things, and foster innovation and skills development will contribute to establishing a circular economy. Community-based shared fabrication spaces offer ways for people to develop materials literacy, reconnecting people to the origin of the life of materials and acting as catalysts for cultural transformation, enabling and demonstrating changes to the way we design, make, use and dispose of materials. They offer people an active way to participate in provisioning for themselves rather than being passive recipients of an often impenetrable supply chain and associated invisible environmental and social impacts scattered across the globe. They offer potential to challenge the primacy of consumption and the culture of disposability, and they invite people to remember or rediscover that they are citizens, not just consumers. As such, they are a signal interruption to the prevailing economic operating system. These wider cultural shifts are critical in order to meet the objective of creating a circular economy. So making room for community-based production and circular economy initiatives is one way of seeding the change in the substrate of cities to bring about a circular, regenerative economy and society. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sharon.
Hey, Michelle. How are you? The lights have gone off.
Thank you, Sharon, for your wonderful presentation. We are very grateful. Just one thing is,
Good to see you.
I wanting to ask. We have one presenter left, and we are gonna have to switch the internet. So we have one presenter left. If you want to, and we are gonna have to shift the internet connection to another notebook. So if you want to hold on, then just hold on. Then we could have a discussion later. Okay?
Yes.
Yes. So we are gonna have to shift the internet connection to another laptop. So, but if you want to wait for several 20 minutes and have some discussion, then you can hold on to the connection. All right?
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But if you are busy and if you should go, then it's your free will.
Unfortunately, I may have to go because security will kick me out of the building.
Okay, so we are almost in the same situation, so we understand. Okay. Okay.
I may have to leave you and bid you farewell. I'm sorry I can't stay for it. Thank you very much. Thanks for the opportunity to participate in the film.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks a lot.
Cheryl, see you later.